Hello everyone, welcome to my Resident Evil 2 Remake, Hardcore difficulty, Leon 1 scenario, no damage, knife only, S plus walkthrough, and this is going to be from the garage area to the beginning of the sewers area, just like I did previously for Claire 1. So for this whole entire sequence, Leon has it a little bit harder than Claire, for a couple of reasons. The first reason is that his garage section, when he has to deal with the dogs after turning on the power, is a lot harder compared to Claire when she just has to stealth past a bunch of lickers. And dogs are far more dangerous compared to lickers because you can't really manipulate them as well as lickers because lickers are blind. And another thing is that the dogs know exactly where you are when you turn on the power, so you can't actually stealth past them. And getting the timing down on your dodges can be a little bit tricky, but I think I've got the timing nailed down because it does rely on the audio, even though I was playing this whole entire section without any kind of audio because I was just busy listening to music. But my prior experiences with dodging the dogs in the garage area has really helped out in knowing when exactly to move. That being said, though, there were still a couple of moments where I had to restart this entire garage sequence because I was getting issues with the dogs not flinching correctly from the knife. And it's all because of the fact that when dogs do any kind of turning animations, or when they just immediately stop after a run, they ignore any kind of flinch animations for a few seconds. So during that period of time, they can attack you, and that was getting me screwed several times. But this was only posing as a problem for two particular dogs that come out of a vent in the kennel area. Those two dogs are pretty annoying for this sequence. They're the ones that get me screwed most of the time. But I'll explain what I do against them when I get to that part. Right now, pick up the machine parts, and then you're going to need to turn on the power. The code is 34. And once the power is on, we're going to have to run for our lives. One of the good things about this section is that when the power comes on, the lights come on as well. So Leon has to turn off his flashlight, and because of that, I can use aiming to my advantage to control my movement. But this first dog right here, hug the left-hand side and loop to the right, and then time your movement just right. You've got to kind of ambiently turn to the right, but only do so if you're not hearing the dog behind you, because there is a point where you can't hear the dog's footsteps when he's behind you. That means he's directly behind you, so you have to immediately start turning to the right slowly so that you don't get hit by him. And then that dog right there, he's in the scripted animation, so you can just knife him while he's in that animation. You got to get rid of him because he will support another dog beyond that barrier that he jumped over. And then right here, hug the right-hand side and then try to get rid of these dogs. When you're hugging the right-hand side, for some reason the dogs never seem to attack you for a few seconds. And if you're getting any moments where the flinch animations are knocking the dogs so far away from you, ignore the dogs and just immediately run for the door, watch your back, and just try to turn. And that's what I'm doing right here for this dog, because I don't try to deal with that dog. That dog is kind of a waste of a knife. So as I'm running away from him, I turn the camera to face behind me. That way I can see him, and then when I see him directly running towards me, I just immediately turn. You got to be very careful with the dogs. The dogs do have a bit of a cooldown after they attack, but there are times when they don't do the cooldown. So there are times when they can just immediately attack you after doing an attack, and it's pretty stupid that that is the case. I mean, I like the dogs on this game. I'm glad they're not like Resident Evil 1 Remake dogs, because those dogs are honestly the worst dog enemies ever, because they don't flinch from anything, and they had so much range on their attacks, and they had some really trashy hitboxes. That is the perfect example of how not to make a dog enemy in a Resident Evil game. Now right here, make sure you board up the windows, and then you've got to walk towards that corner so that you can lure this zombie here, and not attract both of them. I'm going to use my knife to kill this zombie, and then I'm going to use my knife again to dismember the limbs of the second zombie. And what I'm doing here is I'm using an exploit. There are a lot of exploit spots like this where when you stand in a particular threshold, the zombies just don't attack you and they just start going backwards. But when you leave that threshold, they immediately start turning around and they start to attack you because they know where you are. I don't know what exactly Capcom was expecting you to do for this sequence, because there's literally no possible way to do this sequence while those two zombies are alive. Because if they converge on you when you're waiting for the door to open, they will easily grab you, because you have to wait for the invisible barrier to go away while the door is rising, and then you have Elliot directly in front of you. He's really annoying. I don't understand the design choices involved in this sequence. This is definitely one of the stranger parts of the game. But this is probably what they're expecting you to do. I mean, if they didn't want you to do this, they wouldn't have made this an exploit spot, but they did. And right there, I take off the zombie's legs, and now I'm just going to put the fuse that I picked up into the machine, and that will allow me to open the door. There's also a knife on that wall over there, but it's partially damaged. But we can make do with that. Leon has a lot more leniency with the amount of knives he's allowed to have, and the amount of knives he's required to use just to progress with the game. Now, Elliot can be pretty annoying, but you just gotta make sure you're turning him around so that you can get past him, because I don't know exactly what procs Elliot to turn during his turning animation, or to not turn during his turning animation. Because Elliot can actually cancel his turning animation to do a completely different turning animation. And this only seems to happen when he notices you. When he's noticing you, he doesn't seem to do that often, where he just cancels his turning animation to do a completely different turning animation. So that's what I believe happened just then, and why I was able to get past Elliot. You definitely need to bear that in mind, because on the B scenario, there is a sequence where you have to run past Elliot twice, and you have to bear that in mind when you're trying to run past him. Now, for the rest of the RPD building, the strategies I'm going to use are exactly the same as what I did in Claire 1, only with a couple of slight tweaks, given that certain parts of the RPD building are different on Leon's campaign. So, it's all going to be relatively simple. But also, there is an Easter egg coming up. For some reason, when Leon falls off the ladder here, he's making the same grunt noise effects that he did in Resident Evil 6. And that was from a different voice actor. That was from Matt Mercer. I don't know why Capcom did this, but it's absolutely hilarious. I don't know if they just got lazy, or maybe this current voice actor for Leon just couldn't make a convincing grunt noise, or if maybe they wanted to give an Easter egg to Resident Evil 6. But that is just really nice hearing that. I know for sure that a lot of people didn't notice that. I know for sure Carcinogen SDA didn't notice that because he doesn't like Resident Evil 6 because he's never played it properly. But I gotta give credit to Capcom for putting that in. That definitely put a smile on my face when I heard that in my blind playthrough. Now, this part right here is so stupid. If you don't do exactly what I did just then, the zombies will bust through the door, and they will not leave the room. You will be trapped in the safe room, and you'll have to wait for the right opportunity for the zombies to not be in your way. And it is so stupid. I don't know why, when you go back into that safe room, the zombies don't just go back through the door they just busted through. It's really cheap. And even if you walk outside the thresholds of the safe room, they will still know where you are. It doesn't make any sense, like they're not in your line of sight. They have their backs completely turned to you, yet they just know you exited that room. It's so dumb. That section I don't like. I think it's very rigid in how it's designed, and I just wish it was tweaked better. I wish that the safe room door worked exactly like that one door in the sewers area that's at the top of that staircase, where when you leave the room, and then you go back into that room where the two zombies are, they don't immediately aggro on you. If it was like that, it would be a lot fairer, but it's not. I really don't like that sequence. So now we gotta deal with Mr. X, and we've also gotta deal with a bunch of other enemies, and it works exactly the same as it does in Claire 1. So I'm not gonna waste time just recounting strategies that I've already used in Claire 1. I'm just going to go off on different tangents. So, I'm gonna talk a bit about Hideki Kamiya once again, because I kind of brought up this point in the previous video. But Hideki Kamiya said a lot of interesting things in his video with Carcinogen SDA, even though he wasn't as intriguing a developer to listen to compared to Ayoma-san. Ayoma-san actually talked about a lot more interesting things compared to Hideki Kamiya. I just think Hideki Kamiya felt more like a comic relief developer. He doesn't really offer a lot of information to really discuss about the lore of Resident Evil. He doesn't really offer a lot about the gameplay mechanics. He doesn't really offer a lot about anything of the sort. But that's just one of the things that made me kind of disappointed with that video, but there were some points he did talk about that I need to bring up. So, I already mentioned that he's not very familiar with the lore of Resident Evil, but there is a big reason for that. So, he explained to Carcinogen SDA that he's only played 4 Resident Evil games, and 2 of them are remakes of the other games. He's only played Resident Evil 1, Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 1 Remake, and Resident Evil 2 Remake. Those are all games that he had developed. It's so disappointing. That's not something you're expecting from a Resident Evil developer. It's no wonder he's so unfamiliar with the lore. Like, he's definitely the kind of guy you don't want to ask advice for when it comes to gameplay features in survival horror games. And on that note, he's not even a big survival horror fan. He's actually scared of horror games so much. He's such a baby. Like, the guy takes everything at face value, and that's why he was so impressed by a game that was as lazy as Resident Evil 2 Remake. And on that note, Hideki Kamiya finds the zombies in Resident Evil 2 Remake so scary that he wishes there was a cute zombie mode where, for instance, the zombies had masks over their faces. That definitely goes to show that he directs way too many action games, and because of that, it prevents him from fully understanding what fear really is. If he's going to judge the scariness of an enemy based on how it looks, and that's the only thing he's judging it on, then he's dwelling on ignorance. I've already demonstrated so many times that the zombies on this game are not something worth fearing. They cheat all the time, and they're not even that scary to look at. They don't even look as scary as World War II zombies. Like, an enemy type like that needs to gain all these artificial handicaps to feign its lethality and to feign its scariness is not a scary enemy in the slightest. But I'm going to pause on this tangent real quick, because I'd like to make a little note here. You have to be very careful when exiting this room, because Mr. X is wandering the hallways. And if you get it where he's on this floor with you, run to the door on your left. Like, just stay inside this room, check that corner like I did just then, to see if he's coming this way, and if he's coming this way, wait for him to pass, and then just go back through the door he came through. If he's not here, go this way. And when you do go this way, you have to do something very odd. You have to walk at a particular point, because I believe the zombies in the next room that you go into know where you are if you sprint. And I don't know why this is the case. The enemies are not supposed to hear you through doors. But this is one of the rare cases where the enemies can hear you through the doors. So as you see right here, I'm just walking, and I can see Mr. X. So if he's coming towards you while you're busy walking, you're going to have to run at some point, but only run when you're very close to the door, because as we'll see right here, the two zombies that are in this room are not converging on me. You can see that guy on the right just then. But he was so delayed when it came to attacking me because I was only walking when I was outside that room. It's so strange. And there's a similar case like this when you're going back into the garage area. If you are running towards a particular door, the dog that I left alive will hear you through the door. So you have to go back through other doors to get him to not be aggroed on you anymore. And we're coming up on that door in just a moment. It's not this door right here, but also I do recommend that you be very cautious with this door. I think the enemies can hear you through the door because the window's open. So be very careful here. This zombie on the right will always be in that spot because he was busy munching on a corpse. And then this guy, if he's facing directly towards you, you might have to use a sprint counter to your advantage or get him to turn. But we get past him, and you've got to walk right here. If you don't walk, the dog beyond this door will hear you. And I'm just going to kill this dog, because if I'm sprinting towards the door that leads into the main garage area, the three dogs that are in that room will hear me. So that's why I'm just going to walk right behind him. Thankfully, he doesn't have the greatest sense of smell. And 4 hits from the knife will kill the dog, sometimes 3. I'm not too sure how the damage works on the knife. I don't know if there's some kind of critical hit modifier on the knife. And something I should probably talk about in relation to the critical hit system. Carcinogenicity pointed out that regardless of what body part you shoot or knife, you will always do the same amount of damage. So, aiming for the head is no different to aiming for the body, the arms, or the leg. It's just there's more of a critical hit percentage on the head when you're aiming at zombies. And why is this the case? If this game's going to utilize a camera perspective that relies on precision aiming, then it has to give you some amount of reward for knowing what body part you're supposed to shoot, and the kind of feedback that that particular body part elicits. That was the case in Resident Evil 4, 5, 6, and 7. In those games, when you shot a particular body part, it did a different amount of damage, and it also elicited a very different kind of stun. It doesn't do that on this game. Regardless of what body part you shoot, the damage is always the same. And this completely makes hitting the weak spots on particular bosses and also on enemies pointless. I mean, the only big exception to this is probably G3 Birkin, and also with G4 Birkin, because aiming for the weak spots is the best way to hit those bosses, because you do a lot more damage, and that I can understand. But for everything else, the weak spots don't generate enough of a damage increase to make you really care. You know, with G1 Birkin, for instance, it doesn't matter if you're aiming for his body, or if you're aiming for his weak spots when you're doing a knife-only run. You're gonna do the same amount of damage regardless, because the damage increase on that weak spot just isn't that much of an increase. And one thing that absolutely confuses me about this system is that if you're going to do the same amount of damage, regardless of what body part you hit, why is it that the limb dismemberment system and also the hit stun on enemies completely inconsistent? Like with the limb dismemberment system, for instance, it takes a random number of hits to take off a zombie's leg, and then with the hit stun, like stunning lickers, dogs, and zombies is completely inconsistent as well. Yet, the damage you're doing to that particular body part is the same, regardless of what body part you hit. So, you would expect a lot more consistency with the limb dismemberment and also the hit stun systems, but that's not the case on this game. Why? Is it because these systems are governed differently, and they have nothing to do with damage whatsoever, and they're more so dependent upon the number of hits you do to an enemy? I mean, even if they were dependent upon the number of hits done to an enemy, it would still be inconsistent, because that's just how this game works. I mean, I demonstrated in the bloopers of my Claire 1 lab run that this one zombie was very random with the amount of hits it would take just to dismember his limb and to elicit hit stun. I don't understand this game whatsoever. Maybe one possible reason as to why these systems are very inconsistent is probably related to the adaptive difficulty. And I haven't discussed the adaptive difficulty, so I should probably discuss it now while we have a bit of a breather, because all we're doing is just following Ada. So much like Resident Evil 4, 5, 6, and also 7, there is an adaptive difficulty system on this game. And if you don't know what an adaptive difficulty is, let me explain. In each of the Resident Evil games I've listed, there are the primary difficulty modes, which are easy, normal, and hard. However, there is a variable within these difficulty modes that is governed by how well you perform within the game. And depending on your performance, this variable causes the game to either get easier or harder. To further elaborate on this, if you're playing poorly, where for instance, you're taking a lot of damage or restarting the checkpoints a lot, the game will get easier. So enemies will take less damage to die, and they'll deal less damage to you. And sometimes there's no damage at all. I have a couple of moments, and Serpent17 had several moments like that, where he wasn't taking any damage for some reason in one particular instance. But if you're playing really well, however, the game gets harder. So enemies will take more punishment before they die, and they will deal more damage to you. That's pretty much the main gist of the adaptive difficulty. Of course, you're probably wondering what the point of the primary difficulty modes are, if the difficulty is just going to actively change. Well, the variable for the adaptive difficulty has different levels depending on the mode you select. In Resident Evil 5, for instance, amateur difficulty had levels 1 to 3, normal difficulty had levels 4 to 6, veteran difficulty had levels 7 to 10, and professional difficulty had only level 10, meaning your playstyle has no effect on that difficulty. The adaptive difficulty for the most part in Resident Evil 5 was hardly noticeable, and you never really felt like it impacted the gameplay in a way that was probably negative. And with me personally, since I only play on professional difficulty on Resident Evil 5, I expect a certain level of consistency, since I'm not having to factor in the adaptive difficulty within the system. So, the damage that enemies take, the hit stun on the enemies, and the speed of enemy attack animations and enemy movement animations are all completely consistent on professional difficulty because of the fact that the adaptive difficulty is not a factor to consider. And sadly, that is not the same case with Resident Evil 2 Remake. On Resident Evil 2 Remake, hardcore difficulty has levels 7 to 9 on the adaptive difficulty scale. So, the fact that the level changes is possibly impacting a lot of systems, like the hit stun system and also the limb dismemberment system, and that's probably one of the main reasons why it's very inconsistent. And for the most part, this game is very inconsistent. Like, I had actually discovered a way to actually consistently knock over zombies using dead bodies, so that they would actually trip over them. And this was working consistently 5 times. And the main idea as to how this worked is, since the zombie spam grab twice on this game, what I would do is I would try to get the zombies to do their second grab and then have them run over a dead body, and that seemed to work very consistently. It was working on the first couple of zombies in the RPD building, but I tried to do the same thing afterwards after restarting the checkpoint several times, and all of a sudden it just wasn't working. And it might be because of the adaptive difficulty system. I personally believe that the adaptive difficulty should never be a factor to consider on the hardest difficulty. I think the hardest difficulty should completely remove the adaptive difficulty system so that everything is always at their highest setting, there's always consistency to the mechanics, and when you actually learn the difficulty, it actually feels rewarding, and you're not getting screwed by bullcrap on the inconsistencies. But that's all I'll say about that. Let's just get back into the game right now. So we just killed the giant alligator. The giant alligator is a boss you cannot do knife only. You have to kill him with a grenade in order to blow up the pipe. But I'm perfectly okay with that because it would just look very weird knifing that boss to death. And plus, it doesn't even look like he can be damaged by any other weapon. And you got to respect the lethality of that guy. I think Capcom did a fantastic job with the appearance of the alligator, and I really liked that sequence. I remember my blind playthrough, it was very intense. Just running away from that guy, and the music was very intense. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, I know people were expecting more from the alligator, like an actual fight, but I think an actual fight against the alligator would have been crap, in all honesty. I just think the alligator is better designed as being an oh shit moment compared to an actual fight. Because if you saw people knifing the alligator on the original version of Resident Evil 2, it just looked so weird and it just didn't make any sense in the slightest. And it was just so goofy to look at. So I'm really glad they didn't have that exact same mentality when it came to designing the alligator for this game. But anyway, we're playing as Ada right now, and I can't really say much about Ada's section because it's very short and you're doing absolutely nothing that really diversifies the gameplay. And it's very disappointing. You know, I really feel like the side characters on this game deserved better sections than what they received. You know, Sherry received an interactive cutscene moment that lasts way longer than perhaps should, and then Ada just has this really short and simple section, and all we're doing is just dodging a couple of zombies, and then we have to get past Mr. X, who isn't even a problem whatsoever, because if you're fast enough, he never catches up to you. And then you have some mild puzzles, and they're very simple. This whole section feels very simple in design, and that right there was very dangerous. I ended up getting caught on him for a second, and I almost got grabbed. But I managed to recover, and if you're fast enough, you won't have to deal with this guy, but I was kind of slow, so I had to deal with him. But that's pretty much the end of this section, in all honesty. I'm not even counting Mr. X. He is not a problem whatsoever. Like, they even give you pistol ammo coming up. Why the heck do they put pistol ammo there? Who in their right mind is going to waste time trying to shoot Mr. X in the head when the pistol isn't even the best weapon to use when it comes to stunning him? The knife is so much better at stunning Mr. X if you can actually hit his head. But because of the fact that Mr. X is so tall, it's so hard to hit his head. And even with Claire's knifing capabilities, it's still not enough. He's that tall that Claire can't even hit him unless he's in an attack animation. I was able to actually incapacitate Trenchcoat Mr. X using only the knife, and I did it in a very tiny room. And I have saved footage of that on my YouTube channel, so if you want to check it out, go ahead. But it definitely showcases how simple Mr. X is in design, because all I was doing was baiting out this one side attack that he does, which is where he jumps towards you and he tries to do this horizontal strike on you, but it gives him so much recovery that he barely has time to even attack you. You knife him 3 times and you just get away from him. Simple. But I guess I should be grateful, because Mr. X is a cheating AI, and I hate his AI system. It's honestly the worst AI system ever in the Resident Evil series, because of how bullcrap he is and how omniscient he is. So I appreciate any chance to exploit his AI in such a way that I can actually get rid of him. Not that it's beneficial, though, because I don't know why you would ever be put into a position where you would need to incapacitate Mr. X. I just did it for the fun of it, just to showcase how simple he was. But we're coming up on the end of Ada's section. And I actually learned something very interesting about Ada's name from Hideki Kamiya when I watched Cursed Engine SDA's video. Apparently, the reason why the developers gave Ada her name is because back in the day, there was a programming language called Ada. I've never heard of this programming language ever, so I wonder if it's still around. But that was pretty interesting to learn that that was where Ada's name came from when they were discussing it. And they actually got a lot of names from weird locations. Like, for instance, this is not related to Resident Evil, but there was actually a character from Street Fighter named Dal Simmons, and the reason why he received his first name is because back in the day, Capcom went to a restaurant called Dal when they were developing Street Fighter. Yet again, another strange location to receive a name from. It's stuff like that that Hideki Kamiya gave a lot of information about. And let me explain another thing as well. So you know how in the older Resident Evil games, whenever you beat the older Resident Evil games in a particular way, such as without saving, you would oftentimes get a reward? Well, that was Hideki Kamiya's idea. And Hideki Kamiya came up with the idea for having a reward for beating Resident Evil 1 without saving after he played a game called Legends of Zelda: A Link to the Past. So that game tracks your saves, and he was hoping that if he was able to beat A Link to the Past without saving, he would get a reward, but he received absolutely no reward for doing so, and he was very furious. And from that point onward, he made sure that when you beat his games without saving, you would always get a reward, which was yet again one of the most interesting things I'd ever heard from him. It's a shame he didn't offer anything related to lore or to game mechanics like Ayuma-san did, and that's why Ayuma-san intrigued me a lot more when I was watching Cursed Ninja Nestie's Resident Evil 3 director commentary video. But anyway, we're in the sewer area right now. This is the beginning of the sewer area, and that is a knife you can actually pick up in Claire's campaign. It's just, I don't really see a lot of need to pick up that knife, because you put the enemies in some really awkward patterns whenever you're trying to get the knife in Claire's campaign. And that was a G-Adult just then, and I'm about to make a mistake coming up. I'm going to actually get grabbed by this G-Adult on accident. This was not the game's fault, this was my fault. I accidentally turned around too early, so I ended up getting grabbed, and I'm going to have to waste a knife. And I contemplated restarting, but I didn't want to have to restart this whole entire thing again when I had gotten so close. And plus, Leon has a lot more leniency with the amount of knives he's allowed to use, so I just decided to continue along with this. I mean, I had one knife in Claire's campaign. I can easily replicate the strategies that I used for Claire 1 in this walkthrough. So that's why I decided not to restart. Now, in this room over here, Claire has to deal with 3 zombies that are relatively easy to get past. On Leon's campaign, he doesn't have to deal with any zombies at all, so you're pretty much in the clear to begin the sewers area without any risk in the beginning. And the sewers area is exactly the same as in Claire 1, so there's no real challenge to it whatsoever. You'll have no problem with this if you followed my Claire 1 walkthrough. But before I conclude the commentary, I do have one blooper to show. It was from a G-Adult, and the blooper that I got was really stupid. The G-Adult somehow managed to put me in a flinch animation without touching me. So it begins right here, watch. See that? He did not touch me just then, he somehow made me flinch. That's such bullcrap, and that's what caused me to waste a knife here. And then I try to run past him, and he just ends up grabbing me because he's bullcrap. Because they recover way too fast from that animation. It's so dumb. But that is the end of this video. Stay tuned for the future parts. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.